right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Toman. I am the director of the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. And I'm very excited to host this industry day this morning for our second notice of funding opportunity. So thank you all very much for coming in person, and thank you to all of you listening online. So we hope we are able to provide you a good overview of the document that you've already had the honor of reading. I know it's a big, heavy read. So the hope with today is our team at NTIA is going to give you an overview, a little bit more detail into the Nofo, what we're thinking, and then give everyone who's attending an opportunity to ask questions and get better direction about how to respond to this Nofo. So to kick things off this morning, we are honored to have Sarah Morris, the Deputy Administrator of NTIA, with us. So Sarah.
Thanks, Amanda. It's great to have your leadership on this effort, and thank you to MITRE for hosting us. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'd want to start by thanking, in addition to Amanda, the Innovation Fund team for their work on today's event and more broadly on this critical initiative. And finally, thank you to all of you for being here, for participating in today's information session. We're excited to kick off the second Nofo and help answer your questions. So we're here today to discuss the future of wireless innovation. As you all know, we already depend on our phones for daily life, but without a secure supply chain for network equipment, these devices and everything we use them for is at risk. American leadership in innovation and technology has been critical to our economic and national security for decades. And our success in leading the world in wireless telecommunications is a key component of that. But that success in the future is not guaranteed. Our Wireless Innovation Fund was born out of the need to increase the resiliency, diversity, and security of the wireless equipment ecosystem at home and around the world. As you all know, just a few firms provide the full set of radios and computers that power mobile phones, and some of those vendors pose national security risks to the US and to our allies. This leaves the US vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, puts us at a competitive disadvantage, and means our allies may be forced to use architecture built by vendors from countries of concern. The mission of the $1.5 billion Wireless Innovation Fund is to change that. The Innovation Fund aims to foster competition and innovation across the global telecommunications ecosystem, to lower costs for consumers and network operators, and to strengthen the wireless technology supply chains. So far, NTIA has awarded more than $140 million to 17 projects across the country. These projects are unlocking opportunities for innovative companies, particularly small and medium enterprises, to compete in a market historically dominated by a few suppliers. This second Nofo builds on the critical work by investing in technological development and commercial deployment of open radio units. These radio units are the most costly part of the carrier network. They also provide a key opportunity for carriers to make the switch to Open RAN as they consider network upgrades, available spectrum, and market expansion. NTIA will make $420 million available to drive open radio unit commercialization and innovation through this round of funding. We heard from industry that concerns about the cost and technical performance of open radio units are barriers to widespread adoption. NTIA is working to tackle both of these issues through this round of funding. First, by driving commercialization. We're doing that by incentivizing suppliers and operators to collaborate. And then second, by driving innovation through funding for research and development projects. By supporting both innovation and commercialization, we can overcome the technical and economic barriers to deployment that we heard about when we sought comment on this fund. These investments can spur mobile network operators' adoption of open radio units during upcoming equipment buying cycles. This in turn will generate momentum toward greater MNO adoption of open radio access units. This is why we see open radio commercialization and innovation as an essential area of development for the future of wireless networks. The projects funded through Nofo 2 will improve network security and performance and create new opportunities for companies from the US and our allies to lead in the world market. In closing, it's important that we get this right. And we need your high quality projects to do that. 5G and its successors are already revolutionizing how we work and how we live. But to unlock the full potential, we need to open this global market for wireless infrastructure and encourage new approaches. Today is about you. The Innovation Fund is here today to make sure everyone in this room and online feels confident in their understanding of the objectives of Nofo 2, the types of project NTIA is seeking to fund through this Nofo, and how to submit high quality proposals on time that increase your likelihood of an award. So put our team to work. Thank you, and I'll now turn things back over to Amanda.
All right, well, thank you very much, Sarah, for those remarks. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to give a very high-level overview, and then we're going to hear from each of the team members at the Innovation Fund to talk through specific details of the Nofo, ranging from technical to policy, and then specifics on grants and how you can submit the best package you possibly can to increase your chances of getting an award. So if we could go to the first slide. All right, is this better? Sorry, thank you. Okay, so the Innovation Fund was established in the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act. It was established as a 10-year grant program, a competitive grant program with 7 primary objectives. And those objectives are outlined to basically describe the need for this fund to try to drive the adoption and commercialization of open radio access networks. Things like addressing multi-vendor integration, things like looking at network security, virtualization of open radio access networks. So the fund received its allotment in the Chips and Sciences Act in August of 22. So we got our $1.5 billion. And the team has really been hard at work in determining a strategy for execution of these funds. As Sarah mentioned, we had our first notice of funding about a year ago, and we made awards starting in August through this February, and we got about 17 awards out. So we're really excited about the foundation that the test and evaluation laboratories have developed or will develop to be a resource across our execution profile as we move forward with the fund. So what we're really trying to do, what would be a huge success for us at the end of the 10-year program, is to have a healthy ecosystem of vendors that are trusted suppliers that can provide open components globally as well as domestically. And the way that we're going to do that is through a grant program. So we are congressionally mandated to leverage grants. So the grants that we are issuing are going to drive innovation to spur that development with the goal of meeting our ultimate vision of having Open RAN deployed on a global scale. So next slide. So why everyone is here today is to hear a little bit more about Nofo 2. So we hope that folks have had an opportunity to dig in a little bit and read this second Nofo. I know it's a heavy read, but fundamentally what we're asking for is really 2 different technology topic areas. The first technology topic area is for what we're calling radio unit commercialization. So the idea that we are trying to affect the supply chain right now and as quickly as we possibly can. We're asking for a relatively quick period of performance with this first topic area. We're looking for 18 to 24-month efforts with the goal of having prototypes, demonstrations of capability such that mobile network operators potentially have additional solutions to procure from so that we are really driving that supply chain and increasing opportunities for some new up and coming radio unit companies. We are also looking for radio unit innovation. So the second topic area that's part of the Nofo. This is really for advancing radio design. So think to a bit longer term timeline for these efforts. We're suggesting or estimating about 3 to 5 years for SFRA2, as they're referred to in the Nofos. So specific research focus area. So SFRA 2 is really focused on what can we do to prepare for future evolutions of telecommunications? How can we advance things like beamforming, software-defined radios, start to look at things like SDR or dynamic spectrum sharing? How can those designs or advancements be implemented into open fronthaul interfaces for Open RAN in the future as we evolve whatever comes after 5G or 5G plus or whatever it's going to be called. So in terms of funding, Sarah mentioned that the total value we've set aside for Nofo 2 is $420 million. And the breakdown for each different topic area is heavily weighted towards the first topic area receiving larger dollar values, with the assumption that it's probably going to take a little bit more money to get towards that prototype and hardware prototype demonstration capability. So we're estimating between $25 and $45 million applications that we'll be seeing for that specific topic area. For the second topic area, because of the more research focus of that, we're estimating that those grant applications will come in around $5 to $10 million. So slightly lower dollar value just because of the more research focus for that second topic area. So again, these are just estimates, and we're going to have my team walk through a lot of the specifics in terms of eligibility, cost share requirements, and how you can then go ahead and submit the best proposal you can. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Richard Upchurch, who is the policy lead for the NTIA Innovation Fund, who's going to walk through the policy topics that we've defined in this Nofo. So Richard.
All right, thanks very much, Amanda. Okay, so I'm going to run through just a few of these policy-related aspects of the Nofo, starting with eligibility, as Amanda mentioned, talking a little bit about cost share. I'll talk a little bit also about the distinctions in the application submission process between SRFA 1 and SRFA 2 a little bit. So starting with eligibility, for both SRFAs, eligible entities can include what you see at the top of this slide here: for-profit and nonprofit companies, institutions of higher education, industry groups, and partnerships of 2 or more of those entities. However, each SRFA also has specific eligibility criteria for that particular SRFA. So for our commercialization research area, in addition to the criteria at the top, the applicant must be an RU supplier. And we have a particular definition for RU supplier in the Nofo, which is an entity capable of production and commercial sale of open radio units. The applicant or the RU supplier must partner with at least one mobile network operator. We also have a particular definition for MNO, which you see here, and which we'll talk a little bit more about as well later. And that partnership with the MNO must be demonstrated through a letter of partnership intent. The applicant must demonstrate their intent and ability to deploy open RUs in 1 or more commercial networks after the period of performance. And as far as where the applicant and the MNO partner can be based, they can be based either in the US or abroad. However, we do require that either the applicant or at least one of the MNO partners hold ultimate beneficial ownership in the US. SRFA 2 is a little bit different with eligibility. As you can see here, there are fewer specific requirements. In addition to what's at the top, we also require that, actually, we don't require any UBO for applicants under SRFA 2. So the applicant may be based in the US or abroad, and in contrast to SRFA 1, there is not a requirement to hold UBO in the US. I would like to point out, however, that the place of performance for SRFA 2 do apply. And as was mentioned earlier, all of the R&D work, all of the project work under SRFA 2 must take place in the US. So we can move on to the next slide. So this is just a little overview I want to give of some of the distinctions between submitting an application for SRFA 1 versus SRFA 2. So for both SRFAs, there's a maximum number of applications that any applicant can submit. For SRFA 1, each applicant can only submit one application. For SRFA 2, each applicant may only submit 3 applications. So one particular applicant for the entire Nofo may submit a maximum of 1 application for SRFA 1 and 3 applications for SRFA 2. And I want to point out that there can only be 1 project for each specific application. So if you are considering more than 1 distinct project for SRFA 2, then you need to submit a separate application package for each SRFA 2 project. Under SRFA 2, you are allowed to address more than one of those innovation topic areas within a particular project. However, if you want to have multiple projects, those each need to have their own individual application packages. For both SRFA 1 and SRFA 2 projects, so if you're considering submitting an application for SRFA 1 as well as for SRFA 2, then you need to submit separate application packages for both of those SRFAs. You cannot submit one application that covers both SRFA 1 and SRFA 2. Just a quick mention of best practices. In the technical proposal, please clearly indicate the SRFA. And for SRFA 2 only, make sure to indicate the radio innovation topic area that the project is addressing. Also, please name the documents so they clearly indicate what the contents of the application are and which project they are associated with. Okay, now I'm just going to give a little overview of the letter of partnership intent, which I mentioned and what was mentioned earlier with respect to the SRFA 1 RE supplier partnership. So each MNO partnership must be demonstrated through a letter of partnership intent, and that letter must be on the MNO's letterhead, and it must be signed by a senior representative of the MNO. I would like to note that while the letter of partnership intent is sufficient to demonstrate that a partnership exists during the application process, post-award, we are going to require or request a more formal demonstration of that partnership beyond the letter of partnership intent. This is just an overview of the key elements that we want to see in the letter of partnership intent. These are outlined in detail in section 2.4.4 of the Nofo. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to look at that very closely. Just quickly going through these, the letter of partnership intent should provide a brief explanation of the form of the partnership. And we're looking for partnerships that are going to have a sustainable impact on the diversity and competitiveness of the supply chain over the long term. So that's, part of the explanation of the form of the partnership is why you have decided to partner together and how you see that, the benefits of that partnership going forward. A demonstrable, a demonstratable commercial need for the technology from both the MNO and the RE supplier perspective. What resources are being invested by both parties, and we are expecting that resources will be invested by both the RE supplier and the MNO. It should include a post-award commitment to deploying the OpenRU in a commercial setting. A clear statement from the MNO that it has read the technical proposal of the application and it's committed to executing its roles and responsibilities and or commitments in the project. We also would like to see in this letter of partnership intent the proportion of federal funding that will be utilized by the MNO if applicable. Any voluntary committed resources, if applicable, by the MNO, including those that may be used for any in-kind match or cost share. And also the sort of grants administration aspect of this, the MNO's SAM System for Award Management, Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, or a completed SF328 for the M&O. And then, of course, a point of contact at the M&O for any questions that may arise about the partnership or the letter of partnership intent. There is a requirement that certain entities must also submit a letter of commitment in an application. The entities that should submit a letter of commitment include partners or entities who will be integral to the success of the project. That includes consultants, subrecipients, or subcontractors who will be actively executing the activities that are outlined in the technical proposal. In section 4.1.1 of the Nofo, we outline specifically the elements that letter of commitment should include. And you see an overview of that here. So that includes the entity's role and overall level of participation, the qualifications of personnel who will be actively involved, federal share funding for the entity, any voluntary committed cost share, sort of mirrors the letter of partnership intent to a degree, and any point of contact if there are any questions regarding the partnership or the letter of commitment. These letters do not count against the limit of the technical proposal, the page limit. Similar to the letter of partnership intent, they must be signed on the participating entity's letterhead by a senior representative of that entity. And just a quick note of distinction between the letter of partnership intent and the letter of commitment. The letter of commitment and the letter of partnership intent are two distinct documents, two distinct requirements. So the letter of partnership intent is exclusive to SRFA 1. SRFA 2 applicants do not need to submit a letter of partnership intent. And the letter of partnership intent, as I mentioned, will demonstrate the M&O partnership with the applicant. The M&O partners under SRFA 1 are not required to submit a letter of partnership, a letter of commitment in addition to the letter of partnership intent. Cost share is an important part of this Nofo. We think that cost share is very important to ensure the success of these projects that we are funding through this Nofo. So for SRFA 1, we are requiring a minimum 10% cost share for all applicants. That's 10% of the total project cost. And we are going to reward applications that go above and beyond that 10%, and that provides 16% or more cost share in their application. That rewarding will take place in the programmatic review phase of the application review process. And essentially, that's going to involve adding a multiplier to the merit score of the application. And that the table on the right of this slide here, which we have in the Nofo, shows how that weighting is going to accrue as you go up in terms of the amount of cost share that's being provided. So you see that 10% is the minimum requirement for all SRFA 1 applications. So there's no additional weighting for providing 10%. There's no additional weighting for providing between 10 and 15%. But if you provide 16% or more up to 34%, then you're going to get an additional weighting percentage, as you see outlined in this table here. I'd like to note that if the cost share will be rounded down to the nearest integer. So if you are providing 15.8 or 15.9%, that's going to round down to 15% and will result in no favorable weighting based on this chart here. It has to be 16% or higher. If we can go back to that real quick. And just to note that the cost share percentage will be calculated based on the information provided in the form SF 424 section 18. And for anyone who's not familiar with how cost share is or what it means essentially, It is basically the non-federal funding that is being contributed divided by the total project cost. So the proportion of the total project cost that is the non-federal funding. Okay, we can go to the next slide. The commercial transition plan is a very important component of this NOFO for both SRFA 1 and SRFA 2. We have the specific requirements for the commercial transition plan for each of these SRFAs outlined in their respective sections of the NOFO. This is a quick overview of what we're looking for in these plans. For SRFA 1, we are looking for details about the applicant's plan to commercialize and scale the product after the period of performance. And that should include what the customer and in-market demand looks like, what the market position of the applicant and any key competitors looks like, what the plan is to move from the prototype to mass production, and an assessment, a demonstration that there's an awareness of the potential risks involved in this project, and the strategies for mitigating those risks. For SRFA 2, similar but a little different. So the plan should include details about the plan for investing and scaling after the period of performance. And because we're talking about R&D, forward-looking innovation under SRFA 2, this commercial transition plan should provide details on the funding for the next round of R&D or product development. It should include a description of the applicant's past success in commercializing R&D, and also characterize the demand from potential customers for the applicant's proposed technology and any benefits to the customer. And I think, yeah. So thank you for letting me give that overview of some of the policy aspects. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, JD Griffith, who is going to discuss some of the technical aspects of the NOFO. Thanks.
Now we get to the fun part. All right, so for this NOFO, as you are very aware at this point, we kind of divided it between two different specific research focus areas. Obviously, SRFA 1, very much about open radio commercialization. We want to provide advanced development for high fidelity products, help RU manufacturers get to mature these products, bring them to a place where they're ready to start entering into the commercial market. For SRFA 2, it's a lot more about the innovation aspect, research and development, but especially we're looking at how we kind of cross this valley of death from, I come up with an invention, I have a really good idea based on some basic research that may have been done in the past, but, I need some help bringing it from just an idea to something that, we can start attracting private capital or potential customers. So for those of you not involved in government research and development, we use a lot of what's called technical readiness levels and manufacturing readiness levels to describe what we're trying to accomplish in this NOFO, because it provides us a very effective way to, assign a number on a scale of 1 to 9 for MRL and 1 to 10 for, or 1 to 9 for TRL and 1 to 10 for MRL, to really kind of gauge the maturity of a product from I have this really neat idea for some research all the way up to I have something that's been commercially produced and is being deployed on a large scale. So for SRFA 1, we're really trying to target, TRL 5 to 7 projects, stuff that's like, okay, we already kind of proved this out, but we're trying to refine this into a commercializable product. We've already proved a lot of basic proof of concepts already been determined. We know what it's going to do, what it should do, but we're going to take this sprawling breadboard on a lab bench and turn it into a radio that can be mounted on the side of the tower. We have an M&O partnership to help establish like what those final requirements are to help facilitate that partnership. So we know that the awards we're funding, the work being conducted is addressing an actual market need and not necessarily, if I was a radio supplier, my best guess on what customers might want. And we do have outlined certain specifications from 3GPP and the ORAN Alliance that at a minimum the radios produced have to qualify for. But this is not the only requirement. Part of this will be, what the specifications determined through the partnership with the MNO on what the radio should actually be able to do at the end of the period of performance. And then also through the commercial transition plan, since we're not taking this all the way to, full-scale commercial production, commercial success, what does those next steps look like to go from that lab trial or early field trial capability before we get out to this is being rolled out nationwide on a production network. For SRFA 2, we've outlined this into 5 different topic areas that we want to see: software-defined radios, antenna and beamforming, radio component advancement, advanced modulation and digital signal processing, and advanced front haul technologies. Basically categorizing a lot of the main components that make up the radio units we see today and that are going to be very important as we look into future technologies, late 5G, 6G, and beyond. A lot of this will look how this research can help, facilitate future products. Again, we're really trying to target that, valley of death that you end up when you reach TRL 3, 4, 5 to help it move it forward so that we can build some commercial steam. Part of this is also requiring commercial transition plan, but does not necessarily be as detailed as for SRFA 1, because we understand early in the research process, it's very difficult to know exactly how things may turn out, but we do want to make sure everyone understands that, there is an end goal in mind. We're not funding research for the sake of research. We have to want to see this is where I think this can make a difference in the market for the research we're funding. And next, on to Tim.
All right, so before I jump in the slides, I want to mention there are 2 resources that really kind of govern this application process. The Nofo itself, which is kind of the playbook, the rule book for the projects, and the Code of Federal Regulations, specifically 2 CFR 200. Those are 2 specific resources that we're going to use, and we expect that you guys are going to use them also. So looking, so looking here, SAM.gov and grants.gov are 2 very important third-party federal websites that we are going to leverage in this project. So what's important about these is that they've got they are their own website. So you're going to go there and register. They've got their own help desk. They've got their own guides. It's third party. So if you have something that you need to get resolved, go to them first, not us. But SAM.gov is interesting because that's how you do business with the U.S. government. So if you want to do business with the U.S. government, you've got to go on there and register and get that UEI number that Richard talked about. And if you do not have one yet, I recommend that you actually get on your phone right now and text your office, because it's a long process. And unfortunately, with the Nofo 1, we had some folks that ran into problems with that, and they didn't get their UEI in time, and they weren't able to move forward. So it's a critical first step. Make sure you go to SAM.gov and get that UEI. So looking at grants.gov, that's one of the federal government's grant application portals. And so all of our information about the application package is on there. You can go on there, register. You can do a keyword search by NTIA, or you can look up our CFDA number, which is 11.038, and find that package. It's got all the standard forms. It's got a workspace. Everything you need to do is there. What's important is we're not taking any applications any other way than grants.gov. You can't mail it to us. You can't email it to us. It has to be uploaded online through this portal. So this is a really important slide here. So we have initial merit and programmatic review as part of our pre-award application review process. If you don't pass initial, you don't move forward. And so looking at the application requirements, this is section 4.1.1 of the Nofo. View this as a checklist and pay particular attention to the SF424, the SF424A, the SF328, the budget narrative and justification, the technical proposal, and the MNO letter of participation that Richard mentioned. Those are hugely important documents. If you do not include these, we're not going to be able to move forward out of initial and proceed with your application. In addition, and Richard mentioned this, JD mentioned this, I'm going to mention this again, commercial transition plan. Make sure that you have a well-documented, believable, achievable commercial transition plan. That's hugely important. So please don't forget about that. Now, ASAP, that's another one of the third-party systems that we leverage. That's a treasury system. That's actually how you get money from the US government. It's actually online, automatically transfers to you. You're going to have some requirements during this application phase where you are working with Treasury to register, do some paperwork to make sure that you are ready, if you do get an award, that you can leverage that ASAP system. Similar to SAM.gov, it can be a little slow. So reach out to them early, establish a relationship, and work through that, because we would hate for you to get through the application process and now we're thinking about who we're making awards to, and then you're not ready. That would be problematic. So make sure you're getting that taken care of early. I'm going to mention the SF 328 again. So that's the certificate pertaining to foreign interest. That's the document that folks had the single most trouble with in the first round. And so either they didn't recognize that it was an obligation for them and they didn't submit it, or they submitted it incorrectly. So make sure that you really have a detailed read on those requirements. If you have questions about that, you can email our Innovation Fund mailbox. But again, that's a critical document. And then it's really important to note that, so this is a competitive grant program. We take great pains to make sure that everybody's treated equally. There's no competitive advantage to anybody. That's why you'll see we do a lot of one-to-many type communication like this. We use our FAQs, we use our website. We can't really have one-on-one conversations with folks in this environment. And that extends to thinking about like waivers and exceptions. The Nofo was written for a reason. It took like 6, 7, 8 months to write. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's there for a reason. I'm going to say full stop. Don't expect a waiver or an exception. It's there for a reason. So make sure you're following it. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into these two forms here. I mentioned these are extra critical. So the SF 424, the standard, these are all, and when you see SF, it's standard form. So it's across the board. But this is a form that's going to capture some standardized data about you, the applicant, and the application process. So it's critical. Richard mentioned before about having somebody that's authorized to sign one of the letters. Same goes here. It needs to be an authorized representative. We call it the AOR. So making sure that somebody that has the appropriate level of responsibility to sign up for this. It can't just be somebody in your office. And then looking at the SF 424A, that's a standard form. That's a budget form. So it's used for non-construction grants, which is what we are. And the key thing here to keep in mind, it's the full budget. Richard mentioned cost share. So if you've got your federal share and your non-federal share, we're expecting the total of that to be your budget here. So it's not just the federal portion, it's the total. Next. Got my notes out of order here. Where did I go? So here we did unsuccessful application briefings after Nofo 1. And one of the most common problems was budget related. And so looking here, keep an eye on these musts. You must have these things in your budget. And some of those ineligible costs there also. One of the things that we learned from Nofo 1 was that we had an opportunity for us to create a budget template. So we actually created a budget template, went to OMB, got that approved. And so this round, we're going to provide that. It's part of that application package that you'll see on grants.gov. And it's got instructions, it's got examples, and we really hope that facilitates a better process for folks. Next slide. So common mistakes. So again, budget was a challenge. So you guys need to make sure you're doing the quality assurance to cross-check across documents. So budget dollars show up in multiple places. If they don't align, it's going to get kicked back. It's going to slow down the process. We're going to have to cure for it. And that just takes time, and time is not what we want to waste. So make sure that you are matching across documents. Make sure you've got the cost share breakdown. Make sure you got the budget narrative and justification, and all that aligns with the 424A and total project costs there in the summary. Some best practices there to ensure alignment between budget forms and submitting the application. Got to clearly indicate line by line item. And so you're going to find in those budgets, you've got budget categories and making sure that it all syncs across and down. Next slide. So Richard talked about, let's see, indirect cost rates. So I'm going to go ahead. So if indirect cost rates included in the budget, so what's here is important is that understanding that you've got to validate your cost rate. So there's what a topic that's called the, I'm on my wrong page. Apologies. So if you've already got a negotiated cost agreement with a cognizant federal entity, you're good to go. You just need to provide that documentation. If you don't have that, you can look at the 10% de minimis there. We've also seen scenarios in our Nofo 1 portfolio where folks did not have the cognizant negotiated cost rate. They didn't want to use the 10% de minimis. So we can proceed with negotiating a cost rate. And so there are things called SACs, or specific award conditions, and you can then negotiate that. We have an example where folks had like 90 days after the award period, they could come to NTIA with a proposed cost rate. We worked with our grants office, and then you were able to negotiate that. So that's an option too. The bottom line with the indirect cost rate is recognizing that there are requirements to validate that. You can't just choose your own cost rate. Looking at subrecipient versus contractor, subrecipients are subject to all the terms and conditions of the direct awardee. The direct awardee is responsible for monitoring the subrecipient and ensuring that they follow the grant rules. If you're having questions about that, you think about like your subawardees. If you've got a partner that's going to be a PI or a co-PI, or maybe they are a key participant, key personnel, that's a subaward. That's not a contract. And so you need to make sure that you're looking at that. When you think about contracts, think about procurement. Think about buying goods and services and following best practices, open competing. You're getting quotes and things like that. So procurement is one side of things, and being a subaward actually signs you up for all the terms and conditions of that award. And with that, I'll call up my colleagues and we will have a panel discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to moderate this panel. We have put together some questions that we've already received that have been common sort of themes amongst industry and folks that have reviewed the Nofo. So we'll spend a little bit of time having my team describe the responses to those questions, and then give the audience an opportunity to ask their questions as well after we get through those. So hopefully we will have answered or queued off a couple of questions that many of you in this room already have. So you already met the team. We've got JD Griffith, who is our Chief Technologist. We've got Tim Moyer, who's the Program Management Office Lead for the Innovation Fund. And we've got Richard Upchurch, who is the Policy Lead for the team. So to get started, the first question is going to be for JD. Will funding be made available for an OpenRU chip as opposed to an OpenRU system?
Now we're hot. Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it really kind of boils down to what the scope of work looks like. So with SRFA1, it is very much concentrated about developing a complete radio product, not necessarily a subcomponent of a radio product. However, when we talk about the R&D activities in SRFA2, I mean, there's something like that may be a good candidate for radio component advancement, where we are looking at component level development for radio products. So again, that's a more R&D early stage focused rather than, bringing straight to commercial market. But yeah, no, there's opportunities for OpenRU chip suppliers to apply and compete and potentially get awards through SRFA2 research development projects.
Okay, great. Thank you, JD. Okay, this next one, I've heard this one from a couple of folks, and I think we received this in our inbox, but a question for Tim about whether or not you can be a partner, or a subcontractor on multiple proposals.
So can you guys hear me? Oh, there we go. So there's no limit on the number of applications that you can participate in if you are a sub-grantee, a contractor, or any other allowable partnership. The key is that you got to make sure that the other requirements are met. So like place of performance and national security.
Okay, great. Okay, this one's for you, Richard. So focused on eligibility, and why are we requiring that the RU supplier work, specifically research topic area 1, and all research topic area 2 work take place in the US? Is this going to unnecessarily restrict applications?
Okay, yeah, it sounds like this is on. Also a good question. We don't think that the US place of performance requirement is going to restrict applications or applicants. For SRFA 1, we're requiring RU supplier product development work to take place in the US to encourage capacity building here at home. By requiring this work to take place in the US, we're allowing, this just conk out? We're allowing US suppliers to enter the market and compete, while also allowing global suppliers to leverage US resources and infrastructure. And this also includes allowing small and medium enterprises to enter the market in the US as well. We do recognize that global promotion and adoption are necessary for the success of the Innovation Fund. So for this reason, we are allowing some flexibility for SRFA 1 applicants as far as where certain activities may take place. Specifically, immuno or work in support of immuno lab and field testing can take place outside of the US to provide for that flexibility. With respect to SRFA 2, we, similar to Nofo 1, we're requiring R&D work to take place in the US to support our innovation economy here in the US, and also to support President Biden's Investing in America agenda. There we go.
All right, thank you, Richard. Okay, this one's for you, Tim. So for the purposes of application number limitations, who is considered the applicant or the eligible entity in that scenario?
Yeah. So the organization that is applying with that UEI is the applicant. And we're looking at eligible applicants include those for-profit, nonprofit, institutes of higher education, industry groups, and partnerships consisting of 2 or more of those.
Okay, and I think that kind of ties back to the previous question, right? In terms of number of applications,
Yeah.
You've got the stipulations for topic area 1, where it is just 1, and for topic area 2, it's up to 3. So, and then the stipulation that subcontracts, you are allowed to be on as many as possible, or as many as you desire, I'll say. Okay, so this next question is for JD. So we've seen this one a little bit since the Nofo's gone live, but do CBRS or priority access licensees count as exclusive use spectrum when meeting the definition of an MNO?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially since a lot of companies are leveraging CBRS PAL licenses to help, either supplement existing spectrum or help them enter in a new field. So for the purposes of this Nofo, yes, if you do hold a PAL license, we will consider that exclusive use spectrum, because as long as the incumbent isn't turning on a Navy radar, you do get priority, effectively exclusive access to that spectrum. But it's important to note that you still must meet all the other requirements of the definition of MNO found in Appendix A of the Nofo. But if you have a PAL license that checks the box on exclusive use, general authorized access for CBRS does not count as exclusive use. So because you don't have any guaranteed access to that spectrum, we are not considering that to be exclusive use, akin to like if you're using 5 gigahertz, 6 gigahertz unlicensed.
Okay, great. Thank you, JD. Okay, this one is another topic I presume we're going to get a lot of questions about later, but hopefully this one will help. Are MNO partners under topic area 1 required to submit a letter of commitment in addition to a letter of partnership intent? And are there any restrictions on that MNO partnership?
So as I mentioned earlier, the MNO partners under SRFA 1 are only required to submit a letter of partnership intent. They are not required to also submit a letter of commitment. And that letter of partnership intent is sufficient to demonstrate during the application process that a partnership exists. Just a reminder that post-award, we are going to request a more formal demonstration of that partnership. As I mentioned earlier, the entities that do need to submit a letter of commitment are consultants, subrecipients, and subcontractors that are going to play an important role in the execution of the project activities. As far as restrictions on the MNO partners, so the RU supplier must partner with at least one MNO. As I mentioned earlier, either the RU supplier or at least one of the MNO partners must hold UBO in the US. The MNO must submit that letter of partnership intent that includes the elements that I outlined earlier and that are in, I believe it's section 3. You can ask me later what the section of the Nofo is. There are too many. And also, it's important to note that we've gotten some questions about this as well, and I think I might talk about this a little bit later. We have a specific definition of what an MNO is in the Nofo, and that's in Appendix A, where all of the definitions of the various important terms throughout the Nofo are located. So the entity that is applying to be the partner of the RU supplier needs to meet that definition of MNO that is in Appendix A. So aside from that, as long as the MNO partner meets the requirements that are outlined in the SRFA 1 section, including the letter of partnership intent, meeting that MNO definition, and also the UBO requirement, if the RU supplier is not holding UBO in the US, then those are the only restrictions that are going to apply as long as all the other requirements throughout the Nofo are met.
Okay, great. Thank you, Richard. This one is for you, Tim. It's a bit more about the submission of the application. So is the principal investigator, the PI, considered the applicant when you're submitting your package?
The short answer is no. So the entity, the organization with the UEI is the applicant, and the principal investigator is not.
Okay. Nice, crisp answer. Perfect. Okay, JD, this is one that we have anticipated, and we hope that this is a question or utilized as part of Nofo 2. But can applicants use the test and evaluation laboratories that were funded during Nofo 1 as part of their application?
So the short answer is yes, you can. And if it makes sense for your project, we highly encourage it to maximize the use of the resources and the effectiveness of our existing investments. However, there's a fun caveat, especially if you're an accountant in the room, you'll appreciate this, on how this impacts what may be considered cost share. So the key caveat here is that but the budget and spending for the Nofo projects must be tracked separately, and that if you look at 2 CFR 200-306B, for those following along at home, it has to do with what counts as cost share. Your cost share contribution cannot be committed on another another award, so you can't like split you can't double dip on what's counting as cost share between applications, but between Nofo 1 and Nofo 2, and you cannot use funding from any other federal award, not just NTIA, but any other federal award to count as cost share for a new application. So, for example, a Nofo 2 applicant cannot report the funding received by a T&E lab. They'd be subsidizing testing as cost share on their application. And then a Nofo 1 T&E lab cannot report any funding received through a Nofo 2 grant, whether it be cost share or federal dollars, as a cost share contribution into like a program income contribution. That's not saying that you can't pay for services as negotiated between partners, but this has to do with how it's reported up through your application, through your budget narrative, and then for Nofo 1 applicants, how that's reported up through your quarterly financial reports.
Okay, thank you, JD. Okay, this one I've queued up for Richard first, but JD, you might have a little bit to respond to on this one. So, are applicants able to partner with an internet wireless service provider for a fixed or mobile internet?
Yep. So I'll start with this one, and JD, if you have anything to add, feel free to jump in. So as I mentioned earlier, the MNO partner that is partnering with that RE supplier must meet the definition of an MNO that is in Appendix A of the Nofo. So the wireless internet service provider must meet the requirements that are in that MNO definition in Appendix A in order to qualify as an MNO for the purposes of this Nofo. Now, while this MNO partnership is a requirement under SRFA 1, SRFA 1 applicants may also partner with other entities that are described in section 2.2.1 of the Nofo, which is the eligibility section of SRFA 1. So the SRFA 1 applicant may partner with entities that are for-profit or nonprofit companies, institutions of higher education, et cetera. So if the wireless internet service provider meets that definition of an MNO as well as the eligibility criteria, then the RE supplier may partner with that wireless internet service provider. Now, SRFA 2 applicants may also partner with the wireless internet service provider if that wireless internet service provider meets the requirements that are outlined in section 3.2.1 of the Nofo, which is the eligibility criteria for SRFA 2, which again includes for nonprofit companies, institutions of higher education, partnerships, and yep, I think that's it. JD, unless you have anything else to add.
Yeah, no, I think the common thing we kind of see with this, especially when talking about, wireless ISPs, is when we look at the MNO definition, is like, okay, what spectrum are they using? How are they using it? If they have a CBRS PAL, they do make that requirement, but if they're using CBRS GAA or unlicensed 2.4, 5, 6 gigahertz, that does not count as as meeting the exclusive use spectrum requirement.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Okay, this one is over to you, Tim. So back to that UEI and the importance of registering. So question is, our organization registered with SAM.gov and obtained a UEI, but the consortium members are not registered. Is it required that the consortium members also register with SAM.gov?
When you look at that partnership, it goes back to the applying entity needs to have the UEI. Now, if you are part of that partnership, you need to either have a UEI or you need to have that SF 328 and to make sure that you're checked out.
Okay, great. All right, and then this last one I have for Richard, more policy related. So is an entity eligible for this program under SFRA 2 if they have not yet established a U.S. entity?
Short answer is yes. So as I mentioned earlier, In contrast to SRFA 1, with respect to eligibility criteria for SRFA 2, the applicant is not required to hold UBO in the United States. The applicant may be based in the US or may be based abroad. Does this microphone keep cutting out on me? Yeah, it's a weird, something's going on. So, and the reason we have that broader eligibility for SRFA 2 is we want to take advantage, leverage stakeholders from across the telecommunications ecosystem. So I think that answers that question. I did want to quickly circle back to the question about restrictions on MNOs, just because I wanted to also mention that while the RU supplier must partner with at least one MNO, there is no maximum number on the amount of MNOs that an RU supplier can partner with.
One thing I'll quickly add on the for SRFA 2, even if you don't have if you are a overseas entity, you have not established a U.S. subsidiary or anything yet, you are eligible to apply, but keep in mind that there still is a U.S. place of performance requirement, so the work will still need to be performed in the United States.
And Amanda, I want to circle back on something I forgot from my slides because I got lost in my notes. But when you think back to that SF424, that critical list of documents there, if you're looking at documents E through Q that was mentioned there, one thing that's unique about the SF424, those documents aren't uploaded independently. They're actually uploaded through the 424. So you got to go to field 15, click attachment, and then upload those. So it's a little bit unique. Actually, it's kind of counterintuitive, but wanted to point that out because we've had lots of questions about that in the past.
One pro tip I'll add for those who have not filled out those forms before, you want to make sure to check the enable JavaScript button in Adobe, or else you will have problems down the road.
And one last thing on the application deadline. So grants.gov recommends 24 to 48 hours before that deadline to submit. Please do not wait to the last minute. We actually had some examples in Nofo 1 where folks were at the last minute and it didn't go through and there's nothing we can do. Again, all of these applications need to be submitted off online. And if it doesn't get accepted by grants.gov by that 11:59, there's nothing we can do about that. So get it done early if you can.
One other quick clarification to kind of draw back earlier to the partnership intent is that letter of partnership intent between the RU and MNO is only required for SRFA 1. If you're an MNO and you want to partner on a R&D project, that just is the regular letter of commitment. You don't need a letter of partnership intent for the SRFA 2 R&D applications.
Okay, great. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask your questions. We've got a microphone set up in the middle of the room. We'll get turned on, and happy to field any questions you have on the Nofo.
Good morning. Thanks for organizing this event. So my question is regarding the scope of the ORU innovation, right? So as we understand, RU is one critical component of the whole O-RAN system, and the Nofo RFP did mention, like, for example, advanced front-haul technology, which is probably ancillary to RU. So my question is, to actually leverage some of the advanced RU capabilities, there's also a lot of innovation that need to be there in the DU, right? So could this Nofo to innovation aspect entertain components that's critical to enable RU to fully perform, but not necessarily be, quote unquote, be part of RU? And related to that question, if a project does address, for example, even RU SDR, front haul plus DU, does the Nofo has any preference or emphasis about, where do you see the budget or focus should look like? Does it have to be like majority of that SDR versus front haul?
So great questions. I think so. My blunt, quick answer is it's an RU Nofo, not a DU Nofo. But we do want to take into account how this impacts the entire RAN system. So the primary purpose of all of our, RU innovations we're looking at for SRFA2 is to support the RU ecosystem. But we understand that, what does an RU connect to on one end through the front haul connects to a DU, and then it connects over the air to user equipment. So we do want to ensure that we aren't just developing solutions in a black box, and that, we do take into account the broader ecosystem. That said, the focus is primarily on the RU. So there is some, I would say, tangential DUs development that's involved, especially if you're looking at targeting that advanced front haul technology piece. There's nothing prohibited that, but if it's just working on DU, it's like, oh, we're working on the DU because it connects to the RU. That's not a valid justification.
Understood.
But that's kind of what would keep in mind for the SRFA2. The other part you talked about, for applications that touch on multiple topic areas. So if you're reading the Nofo, you got to pick one that's going to fall under, because this impacts how we assess and rate like applications. So if you are touching on software-defined radio and radio component advancement and advanced front haul, what is the primary focus of it? Is it really to develop new radio components? Is it really to develop new techniques for software-defined radio? It's kind of, what's the majority of the work focusing on for that particular research project? What's the ultimate goal? And then use that to help guide which of the 5 topic areas is most applicable.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is to do with the expected allocation of funds between SRFA 1 and 2. Thank you.
So in terms of dollar size value, 1 is going to be larger dollar value awards. We're anticipating 25 to 40 million. You're talking purely percentage wise.
Yeah.
We have an estimate in mind, but I think it's largely going to depend on what we receive from the applicant pool.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, my question is related to the allocation of the fund for SRFA2. In SRFA2, you have 5 areas. Are you going to evenly spread the award among the 5 areas? Let's say we have 10 proposals. They all score equally, but 5 of them are for software-defined radio. And there may be 1 for the other areas. Are you going to try to cover them evenly rather than giving them all to 1 area?
So great question. The answer is it depends.
No, I think every other criteria are the same. Like they are all scored the same. Oh, let's say they all scored up 90%, and 8 of them are for software-defined radio, and only 1 for manufacturing process.
So I would say that in a world of all else being equal, same score, same everything else, you would likely see an award for each different category, because it goes into some of the non-duplication requirements that we have required by statute, as well as ensuring that we're funding a diverse arena of projects. We don't want to end up, if we get, let's say everything's even, it's, everything's 10, 10, 10. Everyone scored the same score. What we don't want to see is over investing in one area at the detriment of the other, especially if we get a lot of similar applications, because then we start running afoul of some of our authorizing statute of duplicating research, and we don't necessarily want to fund multiple reinventions of the wheel. So a lot of this ultimately depends on how many applications we get, how good the scores are, how much funding is available, how much funding is totally requested, so we can kind of figure out where everything is coming in. There's a lot of moving parts here, and so we won't have we're guaranteeing X amount of dollars for this topic within SRFA2. That won't happen, just because we're dealing with a lot of moving parts. And ultimately depends on, the quality applications we see coming out of industry and academia and all the stakeholders we have here today.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, JD. Ian Wong from Viavi, and TNE1 awardee as well for Valor. Thank you. I guess related to your comment about leveraging TNE1 resources, I know there's been, I guess that it's not 100% clear to us on what you meant by the cost share. And as you know, we have the fees that are related to using the lab. And I mean, it's like, like, let's say if we write a letter of commitment to a partner, like what can we claim, right? I mean, obviously, you know, you mentioned the cost share aspects and the fees aspects. So just to clarify, like what is the right way to engage with Nofo 2? Yeah.
So using Valor as the example, let's say, if I was an applicant and I was partnering with Valor and, I fall into wherever on the fee structure, the fee, if I'm using federal funds or my own money that I'm claiming as cost share my application to pay those fees to you, what you cannot do is report that up on your financials as program income cost share. That's the issue, because otherwise it's showing up as, it's kind of the whole double dipping thing where it's like, hey, we're reporting this awesome cost share, but it's actually coming from another part of another funding source that's from NTIA. So that's the key piece there. You can still have, folks pay the fees as appropriate, but it's how it's ultimately reported up in the cost share as part of those financial reports.
Got it. So, but is it allowed, let's say that we just waive the fees for NTIA grantees to make it easy, or I'm just
That's up to you.
Okay. All right. Let me
Talk to your FPO.
Thank you.
Good morning. Mark Erning from Battelle. Had a question around the commercialization plan and also the inclusion of workforce development in that commercialization plan, if you could comment on that.
So the elements that we're looking for in that commercial transition plan are outlined specifically in the Nofo. So I would say, look at the specific criteria we have there. And I think, workforce development is something that if you think that it would fall under one of those elements that we're looking for in the commercial transition plan, and again, this depends on which SRFA we're talking about as well. There's SRFA 1. If you think that workforce development can be part of a compelling response or part of a compelling plan that you're including in that transition plan to show how the product that is being developed can be deployed in a commercial market after the award and can be competitive in the marketplace. If you think it can be a compelling component of a response to one of those criteria, then we encourage you to include description of workforce development in that plan. But that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I'll quickly exit, I have the Nofo pulled up. There is no requirement to talk about workforce development in the commercial transition plan. So that's up to you if you want to include it. The only information requirement for anything around, workforce development, if section 4.1.1 budget narrative, G, in the personnel section, it does request any information that's used as part of your personnel budget to develop a skilled and diverse workforce, develop a new workforce, that sort of thing. So it's more so any documentation about workforce development will happen in the budget narrative, not necessarily. If there is it's better in the budget narrative necessarily than the commercial transition plan.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Purvamudi, Aerodactylus. I have multiple questions. So the first question, is the antenna array unit also considered to be part of the RU? Is that defined as part of the RU as well?
If it's integrated into the RU, so if it's an integrated antenna, then it's part of the RU.
And then for the SRFA 2, is there a firm fixed ceiling or like of $10 million, or some proposals can be more than $10 million?
So great question. We do have funding, so the 5 to 10 million for SRFA 2, the 25 to 45 million for SRFA 1 are guidelines. That's kind of what you expect the boundaries of the bell curve. There is a requirement if you look in section 1.3.3. That is where, If you're outside of that range, you need to justify why you're outside of that range and why it's still a good investment for us. Requesting for more money for the sake of requesting more money without any justification is not desirable. So if you are outside of that nominal range, we really want to see like, hey, here's why. We think with this extra money, or actually we can do it for cheaper, that sort of thing. That's what we really want to see.
Thank you so much.
Also think about, I mentioned that we did those unsuccessful debriefs after Nofo 1. Saw a couple of examples where folks, it's a zero-sum game. We can't approve part of your application and discount the other part. It's yes or no. And they realized after the fact that they should have broken their application up and they would have been smaller and within those ranges. So keep that in mind also.
Andy Adams, JMA Wireless. So on focus area 1 in the commercialization plan, obviously it needs to be built around the M&O partnership. But in that commercialization plan, would you also consider then if that RU has applicability to an international M&O or to say commercial enterprise, can that be built as part of your commercialization transition plan?
Yes. Yes. So are you saying that not necessarily related to that specific M&O partner that is in the application, or?
Correct. There may be other partners
Right.
that we know from a market standpoint that RU may go to the partner M&O, but there could be applicability in the market space otherwise, so that building the commercial transition plan isn't just centered around the M&O partner.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that is part of what we're looking for in the commercial transition plan. It doesn't have to be necessarily restricted to the partner that you're working with in SRFA 1, but if you see broader potential with international M&O or otherwise, it's kind of part of the element that I mentioned earlier about what the demand for the product is and the competitive landscape and all of that. We would like to see more of that sort of broader sense of the potential of this product with other customers in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, good morning. Michael Miller from Virginia Tech Applied Research. Quick question about OTIC certification. Is that something that you're going to be looking for, certification and badging for the ORU?
That is not a requirement.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tracy Van Brockel with AT&T, and I'm going to copy from Ian Wong with Viavi and say we are grateful for our Nofo 1 T&E award. And I have a quick question about a happy scenario. Nofo 2 goes really well, and M&Os, AT&T, I think we meet the definition, I hope we do, that we would be in a position to insert ORUs from multiple vendors, not just one. And if that's the case, we are going to be dependent upon some advancements with management plane, service management orchestration framework, RIC, RApps, XApps. Are any of those work items permissible in either or both ORU commercial, ORU innovation?
So I'll give the same answer. It's an RU Nofo, not a SMO Nofo or a RIC Nofo. But it's kind of the same thing that applies. Like if to maximize commercialization of a radio that's being developed, like let's say AT&T is partnering with someone on SRFA 1, if part of the work plan does include some secondary work on,
secondary, not primary.
Secondary. That's a key thing to keep in mind. Like the primary objective is developing radio technologies, not necessarily developing DU or SMO or RIC.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, this is BJ Shah from George Mason. I have a couple of questions. So the first thing is, we academic people can be really innovative when you're asking for RU innovation. So for example, let's say the ORU, if we come up with, let's say, fully softwareized RU, which isn't really the norm today, and let's say today we want it to support a functional speed of 7.2, What if we support, let's say 8 for whatever good reason? Is that acceptable? Or does it have to be industry standard or an compliant RU?
So you talk about under SRFA 1 or SRFA 2?
Two,
Yeah,
innovation.
so 2, there is no, firm requirement for following specific specifications. Like we do want to see that this is specifications being developed, that industry wants to see because it impacts the commercialization of the product. But there is, unlike SRFA 1, there is no, you must follow the following specifications for SRFA 2.
Wonderful.
So if it's, some pre-standardization or early spec in development, that's permissible. But keep in mind how it may impact, commercial transition plan, that sort of thing.
So that's my second question. So the commercialization transition plan, right? You asked for a maximum TRL level of 5, which I believe is a lab prototype, right? So what exactly is the expectation when you say commercial transition plan? Are you looking for IP? Are you looking for a partnership with the RU vendor so that they can take the innovation? Are you looking for a partnership with the MBNO? What exactly are you thinking when you're saying commercial transition plan for ORU innovation?
That's also a great question. So specifically on the innovation side, understanding that this getting to TRL 5 is very much like pre-commercialization. It's, if this were to be wildly successful, we got all the funding we need to take this to the commercial market. What is that commercial market? So it doesn't have to be as detailed as like with SRFA 1. We just need to see a cognizant understanding. And that's something to think about in terms of like partnerships for this as well. Is the end goal like, okay, so George Mason, you're from George Mason, right? Yeah. So is George Mason going to be selling radios? Probably not. Would it make sense to partner or have at least a little bit of strategy like, we're going to work with the following companies or through this entity to try to transition this into the commercial space, or we're going to work with an entity to bring some of our new thoughts into standards. That's what we kind of want to see there and show like, this is, what's the problem being solved by this research? And how can we actually bring it to the commercial market?
Okay. There's
a lot of people here, like potential partners on many applications.
Yeah. The last question, this is a long project. So what happens when the PI moves from one institution to another? Does it move with so you have this limitation of, let's say, 3 applications per institution. What happens when the PI moves from, let's say, one institution from another in the mid project or something? Does it move with the PI or does it?
We did not make an award to the PI. We made an award to the organization.
I see. So it stays with the institution, the previous institution. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my question is about Focus Area 1, specifically about the relationship between the MNO and the RU supplier. Pre-award, pretty easy, just fill out a form. What does a post-award proof of that partnership relationship look like? And does it mandate a specific business relationship that we maybe ought to think about before we actually submit? Or is that something that can be demonstrated later? It's an easy lift. What does that look like to you?
Sorry, I'm really struggling with this microphone today. We don't have a specific form in mind at this point. We will provide more information about that later on. However, I will say that while the letter of partnership intent for SRFA 1 must be signed by a senior representative of the entity, for the next step post-award, we're looking for something that is going to be legally binding, something that is going to be, I would say, I would encourage you to start thinking about and discussing with your prospective partner how you can demonstrate during that post-award period that you have an actually legally binding partnership, which doesn't necessarily have to be the case with the letter of partnership intent. So while we don't have a specific form in mind at this point, it's,
I'm thinking form not so much in terms of a piece of paper, but rather, what does the relationship really feel and look like? Is it a contractual agreement or something else?
I can say that it's likely to be in line with that, more of a contractual agreement. So at this point, I can't say specifically, whereas with in the application right now, we can specify, we want to see a letter of partnership intent. At this point, I can't specify exactly what type of contractual relationship we are going to look for. But yes, I think it will be in line with that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Natasha Brazel with Intel Corporation. I have two, sorry, losing my voice, clarifying questions. One is Nofo says that there can be only one application for the SRFA 1 and 3 for the second one. It also says there can be a maximum of 3. Is that only applicable to the SRFA, or is it, if we're going after both, is it 4 or 3?
It's 4.
It's
So if you're going after both, you can submit one application for SRFA 1 and up to 3 applications for SRFA 2.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one for the SRFA 2 cost share piece. I know it's not required. Is it viewed favorably if we were to cost share, or it makes no difference?
There's no difference, no requirement, no difference. So
Thank you.
Nick Carter, Analog Devices. Quick question, since a sub-applicant could be in multiple applications, if there's common work to be done across multiple successful applications, how is that cost allocated amongst, let's say, 2 or 3 successful applicants?
So each award is independent. So there is no cross money. And even like if you have an award in Nofo 1 and Nofo 2, they're completely independent. So recognizing that folks may work on multiple things, all of those costs are within whatever award they are working on. Now, we do encourage, like we see in the market right now with Nofo 1, that there is interaction between grants, which is great. But any personnel costs associated with that interaction would be grant 1 pays for their own people, grant 2 pays for their own people type thing.
Okay, thank you.
So one of those things is that might be the pro tip I'll recommend is when you're budgeting for a particular application is, again, as Tim said, we award on an application basis. We don't look at how each application interacts. So ensure that you're budgeting for, assuming this is the only grant awarded. Now, if there is common work and you're a sub-awardee or there's a partnership amongst multiple grantees, during those, and Tim, you can probably talk about this a little more about what happens post-award with like the baseline report and the budgeting and all that. At that point, that might be a time to look at that again and be like, hey, let's say you were a partner on 3 grants, all 3 got awarded. Is the cost really going to be X, or is it going to be X divided by 3 now?
That's a great point. So when you look at the budget, when you go from application, that SF 424A budget, and then when you go post-award, there's a requirement for a baseline report. Those match. So don't come in with the expectation that you're going to write your SF 424A application budget, thinking in the first couple of months that you can tweak budgets and stuff like that. They are going to match, and you cannot make changes to that without NTIA and our NIST grants office. So keep that in mind also.
Angelica Modin with Fujitsu. So I have a couple of questions. One is regarding the awardee amount cannot exceed 50 million. So say if we as an Oreo supplier would apply for SURFA 1, we call it SURFA, by the way, it's so hard to say SR. And say we would be a sub-awardee of a couple or more, is it still 50 million? That's the total for that SURFA 1, or is it per application that is the total of 50?
it's per application. So we're going to be awarding, the awards are going to a project in a single application.
Mm-hmm.
So in a single award to a single project in a single application cannot exceed 50 million.
And to piggyback on that, you can be a sub-awardee. You're not subject to that 50 million. It's when you are the prime.
Okay. Okay.
One thing I will add for SRFA 2, the total amount, like let's say you submit 3 applications, you did really well, all 3 get awarded. The total combined amount across all 3 applications cannot exceed 50 million for the prime recipient entity. Sub-awards, again, we're not counting that, but like let's say Fujitsu applied for 3, got 3. The total summing all 3 applications cannot exceed $50 million.
Okay.
For SRFA 2.
Okay. A second question is around, you mentioned that applicants shall demonstrate that they have considered the manufacturing implications of their projects, SURFA 1. Is it any clarification on where that manufacturing needs to be? Is it, because I know it's the requirements to be US for the development in SURFA 1 and for 2, but for the manufacturing piece?
There's no requirement when the work that is being done for the project activity for either SRFA must take place in accordance with the place of performance requirements for that SRFA. For any work that may be outside of the project or beyond the project, there is no requirement as far as where manufacturing must take place.
The one caveat to that is the what I affectionately call the laundry, the naughty list. So the foreign entities concern, the various entity lists that we have listed in the Nofo. That is the main restriction on most any sort of relationship, including manufacturing or any location manufacturing. So it cannot be in a if you look at unfortunately, there's some nested definitions here. Under the definition of foreign entity of concern, there is a definition for covered nation. And so that includes People's Republic of China, Russian Federation, Iran, and North Korea. If that's the only main prohibition, don't manufacture there if you're applying for our grant.
Okay. A very quick clarification. So the M&O partnership, is it a maximum limit how many partners an M&O can have?
You're talking about how many RU supplier applicants an M&O can partner with?
Yes.
No.
My name is Kalyan Sundar. I'm from Quayside. First of all, congratulations on a very, very well written proposal. A lot of things are very clear. You clarified it further. Still, I have a question. This is written clearly in taking, let's talk about SURFA 1, easier to say, to commercialization. Now, should the primary applicant for SURFA 1 be an RU supplier? Can it not be somebody who enables an RU to go commercial with everything else met, place of performance, M&O partnership, all of that? How particular are you about the applicant, primary applicant being an RU supplier?
The applicant for SRFA 1 must be an RU supplier as that term is defined in the Nofo, which is an entity that's capable of production and commercial sale of an open radio unit.
Okay, thanks.
Piggyback on that. Again, the unsuccessful briefings that we did, one of the things that we really hammered home was taking a very intentional read of the Nofo and being responsive to the Nofo. In Nofo 1, we had examples where actually folks came up with a great idea, but it wasn't specific to Nofo 1, and that's not something we can move forward with. So JD mentioned, this is an RU, like if there is secondary stuff, great, but it can't be primary and supersede the RU and those types of things. So making sure you take a very careful read of the Nofo and are specifically responsive to that.
Yeah, and again, this is not about a DU or a RIC or anything else. This is about taking an RU commercial. Again, I want to make clear my question is understood, but it's not from an RU necessarily. It may be enabling an RU to go commercial with all the tools, techniques, and everything else that go around it. So it is taking an RU commercial.
But it's not, so I hear what you're saying, but we're looking for the RU suppliers to bring a product commercial, not enabling RU suppliers to bring their product commercial. So it's really, we're trying to, a lot of people can enable a market. We have to make the market.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, Dave Patikny from NEC Advanced Networks. My question has to do with the timing of SFR A1, which is 24-month timing. If you look at the taking a maximum grant of, say, 45 million and having the cost sharing of 34%, you're in the neighborhood of 68 to 70 million dollars, which applies probably 100 to 150 people working on it, which also implies that it's probably a large corporation or somebody that has 150 people that are ready to go. So one of the questions that I have on that is that the thinking that there's going to have to be that many people applied and kind of instantaneously, which is going to be very difficult for any corporation to do, particularly small corporations. And then that gets a little bit to the cost sharing part. Does cost sharing consider anything that's already being done today, for example? I know that some of the partners that we're talking to are already working on various aspects of it. They don't have the capability to necessarily complete it because they don't have the funding to do that. And this funding would help with that. So it's kind of like that 24 months is a really great goal. I mean, because in one sense, we want to get radios out there into the industry as quickly as possible. On the other hand, it's a very difficult goal for anybody to do.
I'll tackle the cost share one first, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the team. So cost share, the way I think of cost share, it's the entity is bringing some kind of demonstrable value to the project that's necessary for the project, and it's additive. They're not going to use the grant to pay for that. So if you think about direct cost share, you may have equipment already on site that is needed for this work. You can bring that equipment to the table as cost share. You're not looking for the grant to pay it, and that's going to be your direct cost share. In kind is interesting because that's the you're bringing goods and services, and it has a different type of value. So you can actually bring indirect costs, for example, and you look at, say you have a facility and that facility is needed for the program. You can devise an hourly rental rate for that facility, and then you can use those dollars towards your cost share. Now, two caveats: that dollar rate, you can't just like make it up. You have to substantiate it. And when you think about the allocation, then it certainly couldn't be 100%, or else you'd be only doing this project. And so whatever you are allocating as that indirect cost share would need to be demonstrable.
So one thing I'll add is that, so section 6.3 of the Nofo talks about, like, eligible and ineligible costs. One thing that is not in the Nofo, because it would make it a 300-page document really fast, is if you look, Tim earlier mentioned 2 CFR 200, which is all the uniform administrative requirements for grant programs or federal assistance. And they have a laundry list of different kind of cost categories that are allowable and not allowable. So I'd take a look at that as well, because if it's allowable, it could be used either for direct federal funding or as contributing cost share. And so without going into more detail, but on that, I think there are some ways you can look at work that's already been done. One thing I will also mention, because Tim touched on in-kind cost share, is that when looking at in-kind cost share, like, hey, I already bought this, $1 million piece of test equipment. If the project is only using it 50% of the time, you can only claim 50% of that cost as, in-kind cost share.
Okay. What about any comments on the 24 months?
We're trying to be aggressive.
Yeah, so we're trying to be aggressive. I'd say with that, like, if I personally, this is not necessarily an official answer, but I personally would be shocked if I saw someone say $45 million and 34% cost share. So there's a reason why it's a wide range between 25 to 45. So there may be companies that, are already partway along and they don't need $45 million, or, hey, we have a radio design. We just got to TRL5 with the, technology we're working with. We are kind of starting from scratch. And so we need that extra money, but we're also a large corporation, or, I have access, or I have a lot of partners too, because that's one thing, as well as one of the things you put, like, in the M&O letter of partnership intent, is what is the M&O bringing anything to the table, or is the M&O consuming any of the dollars? So, we do not necessarily expect all federal funding and all cost share to be consumed or provided by the prime applicant. We expect it may be part of a broader ecosystem as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Doug Castor from Interdigital. So I also have a question about indirect costs, but I mean, after hearing that question, I realized that there's a lot that I still need to know about this. Let me just ask, so auditing, I saw auditing was part of indirect costs, and are you expecting that that's included in the budget, both regardless of whether it's an SRA 1 or SRA 2? And are there any limitations to the indirect costs?
So going to the audited term was in the cognizant audited federal. So it's basically that you've already worked with the federal government to establish your indirect cost rate. And if you've already done that, then you can bring proof of that, and whatever cost rate has already been established is usable for this program. If you do not have that negotiated cost rate, then you're going to default to the 10% de minimis, or you need to start the process to negotiate a cost rate that then can be used here and going forward. There are audit requirements. What is it? I forgot the number.
So if you receive across all federal assistance awards, so grants, cooperative agreements from any agency, if it exceeds, I think 700 or 750,000, check to a CFR 200 for the actual answer. If it exceeds that $750,000 threshold, then there is required for a annual third-party audit, and that audit cost, I believe, is allowable, and that's separate from the indirect cost rate. And there's one other option. There is a door number 3 for indirect cost rate. So Tim mentioned you can 4, I should say, either already have an indirect cost rate agreement approved by a federal audit agency. You can do the 10% de minimis. You can request to establish a indirect cost rate, or I guess it's option number 4 is you can take all your indirect costs and list them as direct costs. So that is, door number 4. It's a very difficult door number 4. So I keep that in mind. That is, if you look into CFR 200, that is another option, is listing all your indirect costs as direct costs.
And one thing to piggyback there. So we are the program. So we represent more the Nofo in ensuring that all the goals and obligations that we want to set out are achieved. We partner with NIST as an independent grants office. So think about this as two sides of the same coin. And so NIST is more the business administration side of things. And so a lot of these types of questions, we would actually work with either our own legal team and or NIST to get you the final answer. So,
okay. But if you choose the 10%, is it just 10%, or can do 10% plus these other options if you go over the 750?
It's not, you don't get to pick one, or it's like they're one or the other.
One or the other. Yeah. Okay, got it. All right. Thank you. Very helpful.
You bet.
Hi, my name is John Cook with Fujitsu. I had a question on SFR 1, where there's a limit of one project you can submit. My question is, can that one project contain more than one radio in it in the submission?
We'll get back to you on that one. So, yeah, no, we'll no, we will get back to you with a published FAQ on that one, because there's a lot of internal discussion, and I want to make sure that, we discuss our legal counsel and don't get ourselves in trouble. I say that because our lawyer's in the front row.
Regarding FAQs, we are going to be publishing next week our initial round of FAQs. Our email box got flooded, so we're going to come around with a second batch of FAQs. As you can imagine, with the federal government, there's lots of vetting on official answers, so these things take a little bit of time. But continue to follow up on the Innovation Fund mailbox. Again, I mentioned this is a competitive grant program, so we are very mindful of the one-to-many. If you email us and we vet that answer, we will respond to you, and then we will follow up with an FAQ for the broader distribution. But we want to make sure that everybody's operating off the same sheet of music.
I Todd Love also there, Span. On the 10% cost share, does that have to also be spent in the US?
Yes. So, well, okay, short answer, depends. Really, so it's to be considered cost share, it must be a allowable direct cost. So if we say you can't use the federal funding, outside the US for whatever particular task, then you cannot count any cost share outside the US. So I say that it's yes for SRFA 2, but cost share is not required for SRFA 2. And it depends for SRFA 1 on the type of work being done. So we do have that kind of allowable overseas for work with MNOs. But it really boils down to if we will only let you spend the federal money on something, then only, it has to be able to use kind of both ways.
Okay, makes sense. And just, is an application more favorable if you have multiple MNOs versus a single? Or does it?
There's no yes or no answer here. We are, an RU supplier for SRFA 1 can certainly have more than one MNO partner. What we're looking for is that strong commercial transition plan, strong partnership. And so if it happens that multiple MNO partners for a given application are going to contribute to a very strong post-award commercial transition plan, there's lots of potential customers or potential opportunities, then that could be evaluated favorably, a strong commercial transition plan, but there's no cut or dry yes or no answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Morning, Lincoln Lavoie, University of New Hampshire and Drop Lab. Two quick questions. One for Area 1 with respect to the testing requirements. Any requirements or guidance along like documentation and supporting those outcomes, like third-party reporting, auditing, et cetera, on that?
There is no requirement for, third-party testing as part of SRFA 1. I think that kind of comes down to a lot of what this is banking on is what is kind of negotiated between the RU supplier and the MNO. And if the MNO to, get more confidence in the product being developed requires that, then put that in the proposal. But that is not we do not have a, Nofo wide requirement or program wide requirement for third-party testing for SRFA 1.
Thinking ahead though to post-award, we do have baked in what we call PPRs, so performance progress reports. If so we have those in place for Nofo 1, we'll be developing those for Nofo 2. There will likely be questions as you are post-award about your activity and validating things.
Okay. And then on Area 2 for the commercialization plan, would something going towards open source, specifically open source with a license that encourages commercial utilization of the open source, be a proper approach to that?
I'm not trying, so I'll put it this way. We have no preference on whether it's open source or not open source. I'll put it that way. Our key goal here is making sure something is utilized by the market. And so using open source as an example, being able to be used commercial products, I think would be very advantageous. One thing to also consider, and this kind of goes to what we talked about earlier, like we're not doing research for research sake, is I would encourage to think about like, okay, it's really easy for me to post some code on GitHub and make it open source, but like it takes some work to get people to adopt it, use it, love it, care for it. So that's something that we want to see specifically for open source in a commercial transition plan.
So transition it, but it's not like
Open
this
or
has to go to
proprietary,
a
that's
partner
up to
as the
you.
only approach, right? It
But
can go wider than a single partner.
Yeah, absolutely. For commercial transition plans, we're kind of what we touched on earlier for both SRFA 1 and 2. We're interested in seeing what's the total addressable market here, not necessarily who you're partnered with, just this one instance.
Hello, Ruth Berry with NVIDIA. I have a couple of questions, all related to SRFA 2. Is there any preference for including MNOs in SRFA 2, even though it's not required?
No preference.
And then on the specific priority topic areas, under DSP, will you consider software or AI or machine learning based digital signal processing?
I believe that would be allowable. Let me pull that up real quick.
Okay.
That's why I have the iPad up here so I can look at the Nofo. So I'll say there's nothing against that. I think it's still need to be tied back into how it impacts the radio with the radio unit. Again, because this is a radio unit proposal, not necessarily, or a NOFO, not necessarily a DU or a CU proposal. So I think ensuring that working on like AI based or software based DSP solutions, looking at how that integrates into a radio product, I think is primarily what we're going to be looking into.
Okay, and the last question is for the frontal transport innovation topic, are we limited to current constraints dictated by 3GPP for 5G and ORAN, such as split options like 7.2x, or will other splits be considered for that?
There is no requirement. So kind of what we talked about earlier, like unlike SRFA1, there is no you must adhere to the following standards requirement. Now that said, one thing that we we'll likely look at through the process, especially as it ties into commercial transition, is if there are alternatives, like using the splits as an example that industry is kind of done for 5G, and you're suggesting something different, we'd probably want to see like, okay, well, if industry is doing this and you're proposing that, how does this get all the way back over here? So whether that be working standards or, hey, we actually have some strategic partners that see some limitations of some of the current tech, and this is how we're going to advance it, and they're very interested, that sort of thing. But there is no like firm, you must follow 3GPP, especially since some of the, in this NOFO, some of this tech may not be, prime time 5G, maybe more targeting 6G, which there has not been any defined splits for 6G. So that's, part of the reason why we don't have a defined standards requirement for SRFA2.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hi, Ian again from Viavi. Just a quick one on the definition of an MNO. I kind of read through that a little bit more. Like it says, provide a network, operate a network for the public. So like our private networks or DoD, those types of, or maybe even MVNO, like are those considered an MNO?
So that's a great question. Offering services to the public, I would say for the purpose of this is, can I go buy that service as not that organization? So I would say some private networks would be excluded. DoD would be excluded for a variety of other legal reasons as well. We get into how grant programs work. But it's, are you offering services to the public? MVNOs is an interesting one. And that one is still, it kind of depends on whether that MVNO can kind of check some of those boxes. I know some MVNOs do have their own infrastructure they operate on, but they also rely heavily on other operators' infrastructure. So that's kind of the key part here we're looking at, is this offering services to the public?
Sorry, just to follow up, so for example, a private network for a stadium would be considered, but if it's a private network for an enterprise, maybe not?
It depends on who that's a good question. Send us an email.
I'll try to remember. All right.
Innovation Fund at ntia.gov.
How are you? Diane, Open RAN Policy Coalition. I wanted to flesh out a little bit more about the commitment the MNO has to make in NOFO 1. In the slide deck, when you first presented it, said that they must commit to deploy. Could you go a little bit deeper into what that deployment would have to look like? Wide scale, proof of concept. I'll let you speak. Thank you.
Committing to deploy, and JD can maybe provide some more context here as well, generally would mean deploying that RU in the field, in the MNO's existing network. So deploying it into the networks that are operational for that MNO. We we deliberately didn't include specifics, fine details on this in the NOFO because we want to provide flexibility for the applicants and for the M&O partners to, demonstrate what is achievable and, we don't want to tie anyone's hands or overprescribe anything. JD, is there anything that you want to add to that?
So there's two things I'll add to that. One is the reason why we don't talk about like scale and like firm numbers, like larger number of base stations is better. It's more because scale is different depending on the MNO. So if you're a large U.S. nationwide MNO with hundreds of thousands of base stations, and I'm going to deploy 1,000 sites, that's 1% of your network. If you're a small, MNO in Europe or Southeast Asia, and your network is 1,000 sites, and you say, I'm going to deploy this my entire network, that's a completely different scale when it's like just 1% versus the entire network. So that's part of the reason why I left that a little vague. One thing as well in terms of the commitment that we want to keep in mind is we're looking for a commitment like, hey, if this goes well, how much are you willing to actually deploy into your network? And so this also impacts the formal partnership we're looking at after award is, we're not looking for you if the MNO, hopefully this doesn't happen with any of our grantees, but we live in the real world, is if radio development doesn't go as planned and doesn't have the features that they agreed to, we're not trying to commit operators to deploying half-baked radios. It's if the MNO and the RU supplier need to agree on the details of what the radio is supposed to do and the criteria for success. And if basically it's the commitment, if we check all these boxes, this is how many radios we're going to deploy into our network.
That's great. And thanks for that, JD. Right. We want to incentivize MNOs to deploy Open RAN at 45 million. The majority of that's going to go to the RU developer, right? We want to make sure that we're bringing MNOs in and not, having them be a little hesitant to take that step. So thanks for the question and answer.
Hello again. Hello again. I have a couple of other questions. So I did not see any mention of RU security in the NOFO, in the innovation one. Is that deliberately left out or is that also a focus of the NOFO?
So that's a great question. Stand by 1 second as I pull up the correct section of the NOFO. So we don't have like a specific RU security research area, but if you look closely under section 4.1.1M is the requirement for security management. We expect security to be a component of all of our projects. We're not funding like security specific projects, but we don't want to fund, research or radio development that is, security is something we'll figure out later. Like, no, it needs to be baked in from the get-go. Security by design. So that's kind of the approach we're taking right now is like, the security should be baked in from the get-go, not necessarily as its own separate research area or development area.
I see. And you mentioned these 5 technical areas, but there are others, right? So do you have room for wildcard entries which do not fall within one of those 5 technical areas, or it has to?
No.
Okay. And
or else we get 1,000 applications.
That goes back to what I was mentioning, take an intentional read of the NOFO and be intentionally responsive. We had examples with NOFO 1 where they may have come with a wild card and they wasted their time because we aren't going to fund that.
The last one, so you did mention this, that 100 gigahertz is not of interest, but you did mention that FR3 band is of interest, right? But as of today, we do not really have much deployment at FR3 band. And FR3 band is contingent on how FCC and this thing evolves, right? The sharing and everything. So given that, the RU has to evolve. So how willing you are to take that into risk when you talk about, let's say, RU innovation in FR3 band?
Yeah, so when it comes to like SRFA2 and looking at like the FR3 band, a lot of it is like, okay, we want this, we understand we're funding research and development, but we also want this to be, useful in the next 10 years, sort of research and development. And so that's why we were kind of like limiting because, everyone talks about like terahertz with 6G, and as an engineer, terahertz propagation is going to be a big problem. And so we want to fund things that this goes in the commercial transition piece. If you're targeting a band that's either going to have significant issues, or there is no kind of glide slope to when that's going to become available in the United States or across the world. That's part of the reason why we looked at FR3, is because a lot of the FR3 frequencies, you look at the National Spectrum Strategy in the United States, look at some of the ITU, WRC study items, a lot of it is around that FR3 range, what might be available for IMT 2030. So that's kind of where we're trying to target some of the investment, because it's not spectrum available now, but we don't want to be too speculative to spectrum that's has a lot of hurdles to overcome before it's commercially viable.
To piggyback off that, so remember, we've got the initial, merit, and programmatic application review. That initial review is first a compliance review, and we're going to look at scope. And then when you go to merit, we've got 3 independent merit reviewers that are subject matter experts in the space. So they're going to be looking at that in detail, commercial transition plan, all those things, and then it goes to programmatic. When I keep on mentioning the debriefs that we had, the reason why folks did not get an award comes out of those merit review scores and the folks that weren't responsive and those types of things. So really focus on that commercial transition plan and tie all this together.
Thank you.
Hi, Kurt Jacobs from JMA. It's on focus area 2. You have the 5 categories, and then, but underneath those, you have like sub categories. If you had a project that actually had like 2 subcategories out of 1 and another one, how would you recommend that be proposed? If you have a project that's just takes a pieces cross section across those.
No, so that's a great question. And those, I would say the subcategories under those 5 are more of like guideline recommendations of like potential topics. So for example, like it's, because I can say antenna and beamforming, there's a lot that could cover. So we're like, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking about, but that isn't like a strict requirement. As for if you're doing multiple topics and which one should you put it under, similar to the question earlier, it's like, it depends on where the majority of the work's happening and what's the ultimate goal you're trying to accomplish. So if it does work out, like you say, 2 in one and 1 in the other, but 50% or 60% of the work is on that, just the one, then that would be what I would put it under.
Okay, so you can have focus on one and include some elements of the other one.
There may be some elements of the other, but it's what's the if reading the executive summary, which one would this fall under?
Great, thank you.
Quick question on the IP treatment, the intellectual property treatment. This applies to either SFR 1 or 2. Is both a patent, copyright, or any other IP developed, is that owned by the applicants and or participants?
Yes, recommend checking out 2 CFR 200. There is a nice section there. It's not going to be, I think intellectual property talks about cost-related intellectual property, but look under intangible property in 2 CFR 200. That covers all the rules of the road. The non-lawyer summarized version is the grantee, sub-grantee will own the IP, but there is what we commonly refer to as government purpose rights. So like, let's say a future grantee, if you get federal money and develop some IP, and then 5 years down the road, another federal grantee wants to use that IP, that since the federal government paid for that grant, that grantee for the purpose of the work they're doing for the federal government can use that royalty free. That said, now if they're trying to sell it as a commercial product to not the federal government, that changes everything. But that's the only kind of caveat there, is the government purpose rights asset. But by and large, in all other cases, it's owned by the entity that developed the IP, and then charge whatever royalties you want, make it royalty free. That's all up to you.
I'd point you back, even though we don't have our FAQs for Nofo 2 posted right now, the Nofo 1 FAQs are still there, and there's a specific question on that with our official legally vetted answer.
On SRFA 2, the requirement that all R&D be performed in the United States. For example, if my work plan is to buy existing RUs and modify them, suppose I have an overseas vendor that's not on the naughty list that says, well, we can't meet the specs you want, but our quote's going to include some non-recurring engineering that they're going to do in Switzerland. Can I do that?
So that would, based off the scenario you described, that's likely to fall under a contractual agreement. If the agreement is contractual and not as you're paying for a good or service, then there is no like place of performance restriction on that. It's when it comes to grantees and sub-grantees where that restriction lies.
Okay, thank you.
So as a reminder, then, when we talk about those subawards are subject to all the terms and conditions of the primary award. A contract is simply that, and it's goods and services and is not subject to the T&C of the grant award.
One thing, except for the naughty lists, because that's a restriction on procurement. And one thing I will add, because this did come up during Nofo 1, is what if I have, production overseas or R&D teams overseas, or, one of my collaborators is overseas. The restriction on U.S. place performance applies to cost share and federal funds. If there is like an unfunded collaborator, as long as they're not on the naughty lists, then you can have that relationship. If it's within the same company with different companies, whatever it may look like, as long as it's unfunded.
And this is going to be our last question, guys. We're running a little bit over, so.
I'll try to make it quicker. Dr. Jeremy Moldavan, it seems like the focus is on definitely producing parts, radio units, as well as technology for those individual radio units. In order to work in an open environment, you would need potentially common requirements, common criteria, or common security features or other features. Would those be in consideration for the second component in terms of research, both of the security and or the integration of multiple radio units for Open RAN?
So integration is not a topic area of the of SERFA 2. We do want security to be kind of as like, if you are advancing radio components, 4.1.1M is the product security and cybersecurity management plan. And we do want to see how security is being integrated. Again, security itself is not, a purely security research project is not necessarily what we're looking for. But if it is, I'm working to develop a new radio component, or I'm working with, either as a prime grantee or I'm a sub grantee, some working radio component, and you want to bring radio, this is how we're ensure solid hardware security or software security, then yeah, that's something we encourage. But again, it kind of comes down to that's the primary objective is developing kind of like the commercial ecosystem around it. And we want security to be a very important part of that.
Great. Yeah. So for example, a root of trust within chips that enable firmware and software and or provisioning of network as service, et cetera. Those are what you would say would be in scope because they would be part of the chip itself and enable their integration.
You would need to tie into how that, is like a fundamental component of a radio unit being developed. Yeah, that's the key piece is it has to tie into there.
Okay, well, I am overwhelmed by the number of questions. I think that means there's a great deal of interest in this Nofo. So thank you all very much for your participation today. They were great questions. Hopefully the team was able to give you more insight and more depth as to how you can submit your application. What I would ask folks today, I think everybody mentioned it, Innovation Fund email address. If you have questions after today, please go ahead and submit those questions to us. We will respond to all of those and we will post those question responses as well to our website. It will probably take a little bit of time, but we will try to be as quick as we possibly can answering all of those questions and getting that information out on the website. So thank you all for your interest. Please reach out for questions and best of luck. Look forward to your applications on the 10th.
Thank you for your questions.